The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with tension as representatives from dozens of alien species debated the next course of action against humanity. Towering figures draped in shimmering robes stood around an enormous circular table, their voices mixing into a low cacophony. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the Earth spinning lazily in the void of space, its blue surface looking deceptively peaceful. At the head of the table, the Zarkthian High Commander, Ixorn, slammed his fist down. His scaled face contorted into a scowl. Enough. This farce has gone on for too long. The humans are no longer worth our concern. They cling to their primitive weapons, their outdated ships, and their pitiful defenses. What could they possibly do to stop us? Murmurs of agreement echoed across the chamber. The Zarkthians, a race known for their mastery of plasma-based weaponry and quantum warfare, had long dominated the council with their military prowess. No one had ever dared challenge their rule until now. A slender being with crystalline skin, representing the Ithon Collective, raised a hand. Its voice shimmered like breaking glass. High Commander, while the humans are indeed primitive, there have been reports of unpredictability in their methods. They fight like cornered beasts. Ixorn sneered, his dark eyes narrowing. Unpredictable? More like desperate. Desperation does not win wars. Superior technology does. He gestured toward the hologram, which shifted to display a battle map. Red markers representing Zarkthian forces dotted the map, while small blue clusters, indicating human defenses, appeared scattered and unorganized. Humanity is on the brink of collapse, Ixorn continued. Their military forces are outdated, their weaponry laughable. Plasma cannons? They still use projectile-based firearms. And as for their tactics, it's as though they haven't evolved past their own wars centuries ago. The chamber erupted into laughter, the mockery thick in the air. But in one corner, a lone figure, human in form, but draped in shadows, watched silently. He said nothing, his fingers tracing the hilt of a ceremonial blade at his side. No one noticed him slip out of the room, his presence as fleeting as a shadow cast by a dying star. Captain Jace Weller stared out the viewport of his ship, the Endurance, as it drifted through the asteroid belt just outside Earth's orbit. The debris from countless battles littered the void, remnants of ships, both human and alien, that had met their end in the relentless war. His once pristine uniform was now scarred with burns and cuts, a testament to the brutal skirmishes he had survived. "Sir, we've picked up a transmission from the Galactic Council," Lieutenant Gregor, his second in command, announced from his station. "The Zarkthians are preparing for a full-scale invasion." Weller didn't flinch. He had expected this. He had seen the arrogance in the Zarkthians' tactics, their dismissal of humanity as little more than an annoyance to be crushed. But he knew something they didn't. He knew the heart of Earth, the spirit of its people, and more importantly, he knew what lay hidden beneath the surface of human history. "Let them come," Weller muttered under his breath. "They'll learn soon enough." He turned to Gregor. "Prep the crew. We're going dark. No comms, no signals. We disappear until we're ready to strike." Gregor hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, our resources are running low. Our weapons." "Outdated, right?" Weller cut him off, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's what they all say. But our weapons, our true weapons, are more than just steel and firepower. It's in the way we think, the way we adapt. They don't understand us, Gregor. They can't. And that's what's going to save us." The Zarkthian fleet descended upon Earth with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Massive warships, their hulls bristling with plasma turrets, formed a blockade around the planet, their sensors scanning for any sign of resistance. On the surface, humanity scrambled to organize what remained of its defenses. Old tanks rumbled to life, fighter jets ancient by galactic standards took to the skies, and ground troops prepared for the inevitable assault. In the chaos, Captain Weller's team moved in silence. The Endurance had slipped past the Zarkthian blockade, hidden among the debris of destroyed ships. Weller, Gregor, and a small team of hardened veterans had landed in an abandoned base deep in the Alaskan wilderness. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way to the entrance of an old military bunker. Gregor glanced around, his breath visible in the freezing air. "I can't believe this place is still operational. It's ancient." "Not as ancient as what's inside," Weller replied cryptically as he keyed in the access code. The heavy steel doors groaned open, revealing a dark corridor leading deep into the mountain. As they descended, the walls around them flickered with dim emergency lights. The air was stale, untouched by human presence for decades. Gregor frowned. "Captain, what are we looking for here? I thought the plan was to rally what's left of our forces." Weller's expression hardened. "We are rallying our forces, just not in the way you think." They reached the heart of the bunker, a massive underground chamber filled with rows upon rows of sealed crates. Weller approached one, wiping away the dust from its surface. The words stenciled across it were faded but still legible: Project Valkyrie. Gregor's eyes widened. "That's impossible. Project Valkyrie was decommissioned," Weller finished for him. "Or at least, that's what the history books say. But this is the weapon we need. Not some shiny plasma rifle. This is old school, brutal, and perfect." He pried the crate open, revealing its contents: a suit of armor, unlike anything Gregor had ever seen. It was sleek yet robust, made of a material that seemed to shimmer between metal and something else entirely. "Exoskeleton combat suits," Weller explained, his voice low. "Designed for wars long before the Zarthians ever knew we existed. These were deemed too dangerous, too powerful for mass production. But now," he grinned, a fire in his eyes, "now we're going to show them just how dangerous we can be." As the Zarthians began their assault, humanity's defenses crumbled as expected. Cities fell, and the skies burned with the fury of alien bombardment. But in the midst of the chaos, whispers spread, whispers of human soldiers moving faster than the eye could follow, of impossible strength, of tactics that defied reason. And at the heart of it all was Captain Jace Weller, clad in the last remnants of a forgotten age, leading his men into battle. The battlefields of Earth were a cacophony of destruction. Zarthian war machines roamed freely, their plasma cannons reducing human structures to molten slag. Their soldiers, heavily armored and confident, marched through the streets of once proud cities. But something unexpected had begun to take place. In the shadows of the ruined buildings, human soldiers moved with unsettling speed and precision, striking at Zarthian patrols before disappearing without a trace. The reports coming into the Zarthian command ship were dismissed at first: anomalies, miscommunications, panic-induced hallucinations. The humans couldn't possibly be putting up more than a token resistance. Their weapons were still the same crude projectile firearms, and their armor, laughable in comparison to the Zarthian tech. Yet, the casualty reports kept increasing. High Commander Eichsorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unyielding. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the metallic armrest of his command throne as he watched the latest footage from the battle below. Zarthian soldiers were shown marching through the ruins of New Chicago, when, out of nowhere, a blur shot through their ranks. The camera struggled to track the movement as soldiers were tossed aside like ragdolls. Plasma fire erupted in every direction, but none hit its mark. A moment later, the streets were silent. The few surviving soldiers stumbled back, confusion written on their faces. Eichsorn's second in command, a hulking Zarthian named Tyros, approached. "High Commander, these reports, they are becoming more frequent. The humans are employing some kind of advanced guerrilla warfare. They're soldiers, they're not fighting like before." Eichsorn's scowl deepened. "Guerrilla warfare, always skulking in the shadows, afraid to face us head-on. Typical human cowardice." Tyros hesitated. "It's not just that, sir. Their movements, they're enhanced. Faster than anything we've seen from them before." Eichsorn's fist slammed onto the armrest, silencing any further comment. "Enough. It's human propaganda. They're trying to sow fear among our ranks, playing to their strengths because they know they're weak. We press forward. Increase the bombardments. Destroy every city, every structure. No more hesitation. I want Earth in ruins by the next rotation." Tyros saluted and hurried off, though a flicker of doubt lingered in his eyes. Beneath the frozen tundra of Alaska, Captain Jace Weller tightened the straps of his exoskeleton suit. The armor hummed softly as it came online, its systems syncing with his nervous system. He flexed his fingers, feeling the enhanced strength surge through his limbs. Around him, his squad each clad in a similar suit prepared for their next strike. "Target is a Zarkthian command outpost just outside of Washington, D.C., Weller briefed them. "Intel suggests it's coordinating their eastern offensive. We take it out. We buy the resistance time to regroup." Sergeant Hayes, one of Weller's most trusted men, chuckled darkly. "Feels like overkill, doesn't it? These suits make it almost too easy." Weller gave him a sideways glance. "Don't get cocky. The Zarks are arrogant, but they're not stupid. They'll adapt, and when they do, we'll need every advantage we've got." Hayes nodded, the humor fading from his expression. "Understood, sir." The door to the underground bunker slid open, revealing the blizzard raging outside. Weller led his men into the storm, their footsteps silent despite the armor's weight. The suits were a marvel of engineering, designed not just to augment strength, but to enhance agility and perception. Every movement felt fluid, natural like an extension of their own bodies. And more importantly, they were equipped with a stealth module that made them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. As they neared the Zarkthian outpost, Weller signaled for his men to fan out. The outpost was heavily guarded, plasma turrets lining the perimeter, and squads of Zarkthian soldiers patrolling the area. Weller crouched behind a snowbank, his visor scanning the landscape. "We move in on my mark," he whispered into his comm. 3, 2, 1. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly. The first Zarkthian patrol never saw them coming. Weller's blade sliced through the air, finding the gap between the alien's armor and its neck. The creature gurgled once, then collapsed. Around him, his men were doing the same, dispatching the Zarkthians with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the outer perimeter was clear. "Good work," Weller muttered as they moved closer to the command building. "Hayes, take Gregor and sweep the north side. I'll handle the main entrance." They split up, the sound of the howling wind masking their approach. Weller moved toward the command center, his heart steady, his focus razor sharp. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, but the suit's AI kept his vitals in check, ensuring he didn't burn out too quickly. As he reached the main door, he paused. Something wasn't right. The outpost was too quiet, too still. His visor scanned the area again, and that's when he saw it barely a shimmer in the snow. Cloaked Zarkthian sentries, their forms almost invisible, stood guard just beyond the entrance. Weller gritted his teeth. "They've got cloaked guards. Advanced tech. Guess we're not the only ones with tricks up our sleeve." Switching to infrared, Weller pinpointed their positions. There were 6 of them, each armed with plasma rifles that could easily tear through his armor if they got a clean shot. But he wasn't about to give them the chance. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the suit's adaptive camouflage, blending seamlessly into the surroundings. He moved closer, creeping up behind the nearest sentry. One quick strike, and the alien collapsed into the snow. He didn't stop, there was no time to hesitate. One by one, the cloaked sentries fell, their bodies joining the snowdrifts. As he approached the door, he keyed into the command frequency. "Gregor, Hayes, report." Static crackled in his earpiece before Gregor's voice came through. "We've secured the north side, Captain. No resistance. Almost too easy." Weller's stomach churned. "It's a trap. Get out of there, now." But it was too late. A massive explosion rocked the ground beneath him, and he heard Gregor's pained scream over the comm. His visor flared with warning lights as debris rained down around him. Weller cursed, sprinting back toward the north side, but the explosion had done its job. The north sector was engulfed in flames, and through the smoke, he saw the bodies of his men strewn across the snow. "No," Weller breathed, his fists clenching in rage. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be untouchable, invincible. But the Zarthians had anticipated them, adapted faster than he'd expected, and now his men were dead. His comm crackled again, this time with a Zarthian voice. "Human, did you think we wouldn't learn? Did you think we wouldn't evolve, just as you have? Your little rebellion ends here." Weller's jaw tightened. Not yet, it doesn't. He turned toward the command center, his eyes burning with fury. If the Zarthians thought this was over, they were about to learn a very painful lesson. Captain Jace Weller surged forward, the rage in his chest driving him toward the command center with singular focus. The smoldering remains of his team were still visible in his peripheral vision, but he couldn't afford to stop, not now. The Zarthians had dealt a blow, but they had underestimated the human spirit, his spirit. His fingers brushed against the trigger of his rifle, but he knew better than to charge headlong into whatever was waiting for him. The Zarthians were cunning, but humans? They were relentless. As he approached the heavily fortified structure, his suit's sensors picked up movement inside. Heat signatures danced behind the walls, too many to engage head-on. The outer blast doors loomed ahead thick, reinforced alien alloys designed to withstand even the most advanced Earth-based weaponry. Weller smirked. If they thought those doors would hold, they were sorely mistaken. He activated the interface on his forearm and scrolled through the inventory his team had painstakingly developed in secret labs under the ruins of old Seattle. His thumb hovered over one particular device, something they had referred to as the Relic. It had been designed based on principles the Zarthians had long abandoned. It wasn't flashy, not advanced by alien standards. It was something the humans had recovered from old archives, the kind of technology the Zarthians considered obsolete. But that was their downfall, arrogance. And in war, arrogance was a weakness. Outdated, they called it. Inferior. He was about to show them just how wrong they were. Weller stepped into the shadow of the command outpost, cloaked in the storm's relentless winds, and activated the relic. A low hum echoed from his wrist as the ancient device came to life. A wave of energy rippled through the ground, invisible but unmistakable to any sensitive equipment nearby. The Zarthians' entire command center was based on energy shields, plasma-based technology, and complex nanite reinforcements. The relic cared about none of it. As the pulse reached the blast doors, they shuddered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sickening screech, the doors began to fold in on themselves. The metal warped, bent out of shape, and peeled away as though it were made of flimsy cardboard. The Zarthians had never anticipated an attack like this one based on such primitive mechanics. Weller pushed through the mangled entrance, his rifle raised. The Zarthians inside had barely begun to react. Panic flashed across their reptilian faces as they scrambled for their plasma weapons, but they were too slow. He moved like a shadow, his enhanced reflexes giving him a deadly advantage. One by one, they fell under his relentless assault, never even knowing what hit them. He moved deeper into the structure, navigating through corridors bathed in the eerie red light of emergency sirens. His heads-up display marked a path to the command center, and Weller knew he was getting close. The deeper he went, the more elaborate the security measures became. Automated turrets whirred to life, tracking his movements with deadly precision. But Weller was faster. He zigzagged through the narrow hallways, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. Sparks flew as the turrets exploded one after another. Finally, he reached the heart of the outpost, a large, domed chamber filled with holographic projections and alien consoles. Zarthian officers barked orders in their guttural language, unaware of Weller's presence until he was already among them. His first shot took out the commanding officer, a towering figure draped in elaborate alien armor. The others scrambled to respond, but it was too late. Weller's anger-fueled precision made short work of them. When the last officer crumpled to the floor, he stood alone in the command center, breathing heavily. The victory felt hollow with the loss of his team still fresh, but he wasn't done. Not yet. His visor scanned the room, locking onto a central terminal. With a few quick commands, he hacked into the Zarthian systems, accessing their tactical networks. His heart raced as information flooded his display: fleet positions, troop movements, and most importantly, a map of the Zarkthian command hierarchy. There was one name that stood out: High Commander Eichhorn. Weller's lips curled into a grim smile. Gotcha. He downloaded everything he could and prepared to move. But as he turned to leave, his calm crackled to life. Weller, you think this is over? Weller's heart froze. The voice belonged to High Commander Eichhorn. You can't hide from me, Eichhorn continued, his voice dripping with malice. I've seen your pathetic tricks. You think using relics from your ancestors' past will turn the tide of this war? No, human. Your fate is sealed. Your species is nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. You were born in violence, and in violence you will die. Weller clenched his fists, but he kept his voice steady. Funny. The same could be said about you, Eichhorn. I know where you are now. You won't be hiding behind your fleet for much longer. Eichhorn laughed a cold, hollow sound. You overestimate yourself, Captain. Do you think we haven't learned from our mistakes? Do you really think that after all this time, after all the worlds we've conquered, we wouldn't adapt to a few stubborn apes with outdated weapons? The command console beeped, and Weller glanced at the display. A countdown appeared on his visor: 10 seconds. His blood ran cold. It was a self-destruct sequence. That's where you're wrong, Eichhorn's voice echoed as the walls began to hum ominously. I've learned a lot about your species, Weller. I've learned that no matter how strong you think you are, you always make the same mistake. You fight until it's too late to escape. Weller cursed under his breath. He bolted for the exit, sprinting down the hallways as the rumble of the impending explosion grew louder behind him. His enhanced legs powered him forward, but the ground began to shake violently. He leapt through the twisted remains of the blast door just as the entire structure erupted in a deafening explosion. A shockwave slammed into him, sending him tumbling across the snow. For a moment, everything was a blur of white and red. When Weller regained consciousness, the night sky above him was filled with the glow of Zarkthian warships. The explosion had leveled the command center, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where the building once stood. His visor flickered as it rebooted, and the cold reality of his situation hit him. He was alone. But not for long. A low rumble shook the ground beneath him. In the distance, he saw the silhouette of a massive Zarkthian war mech approaching, a towering machine of destruction bristling with plasma cannons and armor that had shrugged off every Earth-based attack thus far. It was coming for him, and there was no backup, no escape. Weller struggled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. His suit had taken heavy damage, and the HUD showed critical system failures across the board. But he wasn't done yet. He never was. Slowly, painfully, he reached for the last remaining device in his arsenal. Another relic. This one was different, something they had only just begun to understand. It was small, almost unimpressive by comparison to the high-tech gear humans had relied on for decades, but it had the potential to turn the tide. Weller had seen what it could do in testing, though no one had been reckless enough to use it in the field. Until now. The mech drew closer, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Weller stood firm, gripping the relic in his hand. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about sending a message. He pressed the activation switch. The relic thrummed in Weller's hand, an odd warmth spreading through his fingers as the device came to life. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, a strange, ancient energy coursing through his body, mingling with the cold determination in his chest. The Zarkthian war mech loomed ever closer, its massive form casting a shadow over the scorched remains of the command center. Plasma cannons on its shoulders hummed to life, locking onto Weller with a cold precision. He gripped the relic tighter, every instinct telling him this was madness. His suit was damaged, his weaponry depleted, and yet here he stood, a single human facing down a machine designed for total destruction. The Zarkthians must have found it laughable, but they didn't know what he held in his hand. A relic from Earth's distant past, a forgotten piece of technology from an era long before humanity's expansion into the stars. It wasn't flashy, wasn't sophisticated by galactic standards, but it held something no one else had: the unpredictable spark of human ingenuity. Weller's voice was steady as he muttered under his breath, "Let's see what you can do." The relic's surface shifted, its ancient metal pulsing with a faint, golden light. The air around him seemed to shimmer, the temperature spiking briefly before plummeting, as if reality itself were adjusting to the device's presence. The war mech paused for a split second, as though sensing something was off. It was all Weller needed. He activated the relic. In an instant, the world shifted. Time seemed to slow, the ground beneath him vibrating with a low, resonant hum that echoed in his bones. The mech, so massive and unrelenting, began to falter. Its plasma cannons, once locked onto Weller, flickered and sputtered. A high-pitched whine filled the air, a sound that sent chills down his spine. The relic was doing something to the machine, something beyond human understanding. The mech staggered, its movements becoming jerky, erratic. Sparks flew from its joints as the relic's invisible tendrils of energy wrapped around it, worming their way into the very core of its systems. Weller watched in awe as the towering machine, a symbol of Zarkthian dominance, was brought to its knees by a relic his ancestors had deemed obsolete. The mech's armor cracked, fissures spreading across its surface as if an invisible hand were tearing it apart from the inside. Weller's breath caught in his throat. This was power unlike anything he had ever seen, raw, untamed, and devastating. But even as the mech faltered, he knew it wasn't over. The Zarkthians wouldn't stop. They never did. With a deafening roar, the mech's plasma core overloaded, sending a shockwave of energy through the air. Weller dove for cover as the explosion tore through the landscape, the force of it rattling his teeth. Debris rained down around him, shards of metal and twisted fragments of the mech littering the snow-covered ground. When the dust finally settled, Weller pushed himself to his feet, coughing through the thick smoke. The war mech lay in ruins, a smoldering wreck that no longer posed a threat. But the victory felt hollow. The battle wasn't won, not yet. He still had a mission, and it wasn't just about survival, it was about ending the Zarkthian reign. His suit's systems flickered to life again, the HUD displaying a series of alerts: minimal power reserves, critical system failures, and the all-too-familiar red glow of incoming hostiles. Weller grimaced. The Zarkthians wouldn't send just one mech to finish him off. They'd send an entire army if they had to. The relic in his hand dimmed, its energy spent. It had done its job, for now, but Weller knew he couldn't rely on it again. The Zarkthians had underestimated humanity's outdated technology once, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He needed a new plan, and fast. His visor pinged, a familiar voice crackling through the static. "Weller, you still alive?" Weller's heart lifted at the sound of Lieutenant Hayes. "Barely," he grunted, wiping the soot from his visor. "Where the hell are you?" "About 3 clicks east," Hayes replied. "We've been monitoring your little stunt with the relic. Impressive, but you've got company incoming Zarkthian reinforcements, heavy armor." Weller scanned the horizon, his enhanced vision picking up the faint silhouettes of more war mechs approaching from the distance. He cursed under his breath. "Yeah, I see 'em. Get moving. We've secured a transport, but it's not gonna wait forever," Hayes said, urgency creeping into his voice. "Whatever you did, it's pissed them off. They're mobilizing half the damn planet." "Good," Weller growled. "Let 'em come." The channel went silent for a moment, and then Hayes spoke again, his tone more serious. "Jace, don't be a hero. Get out of there. You're no good to us dead." Weller clenched his fists, staring down at the ruined mech in front of him. He could feel the weight of his fallen comrades, the loss of his team, pressing down on his chest. But Hayes was right. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival, and more than that, it was about winning. "On my way," Weller muttered, turning toward the east. He moved quickly, his legs burning with exhaustion as he made his way across the jagged terrain. The storm had lessened, but the wind still howled through the mountains, carrying with it the distant sounds of battle. Every step felt heavier than the last, his body pushing past its limits. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. As he crested a ridge, he spotted the transport, a sleek, black dropship hovering just above the ground, its engines glowing faintly in the dim light. Hayes and a small team of soldiers were waiting for him, their weapons trained on the horizon. "Get in," Hayes shouted, waving him over. Weller didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the dropship, feeling the ground tremble beneath him as the Zarkthian reinforcements drew closer. Plasma fire erupted in the distance, lighting up the sky with bursts of blue and green energy. The war wasn't over, it was just getting started. He dove into the transport, the doors sealing shut behind him as the ship lifted off. The roar of the engines drowned out the sounds of battle below, and for a brief moment, Weller allowed himself to breathe. "Good to see you in one piece," Hayes said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Yeah, well, that makes one of us," Weller replied, leaning back against the wall. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but he couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. Hayes sat down across from him, his expression grim. "We've got intel from the command center. Looks like you stirred up a hornet's nest." Weller raised an eyebrow. "What kind of intel?" Hayes pulled up a holographic display, showing a map of the Zarkthian fleet movements. "Their command structure is in disarray. Whatever you did with that relic, it's caused a ripple effect through their entire network. But there's more." Weller leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Go on." "We've intercepted transmissions from their high command. They're scrambling to reinforce their positions, but they're afraid, Jace. They've never seen anything like what you pulled off. They're starting to question their own superiority." A slow smile spread across Weller's face. "Good. Let's keep them scared." But even as he said the words, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. The relics had given them an edge, but how long could they rely on the past to secure their future? The Zarkthians wouldn't stay afraid forever. They were adaptable, relentless, just like humans. Weller glanced down at the relic still clutched in his hand. Its glow had faded, but he knew its power wasn't gone. It was simply dormant, waiting to be unleashed again. And when the time came, he'd be ready. But for now, they had a war to win. The dropship's cabin hummed as it climbed through the atmosphere, the distant rumbles of battle fading away beneath the clouds. Weller leaned against the cold metal wall, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system. His body still thrummed with the aftereffects of the relic's power, but now that the immediate danger had passed, the exhaustion hit him like a ton of bricks. Across from him, Lieutenant Hayes was busy relaying updates to command. The holographic map flickered with real-time data, showing the shifting movements of both human and Zarkthian forces across the planet. The war was far from over, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Hayes finished his report and turned to Weller, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," Weller muttered, rubbing his temples. "How long before we hit the next front?" Hayes shook his head. "You're not going anywhere just yet. Command wants you back at base for a full debrief and a medical check. Whatever that relic did to you, they need to figure it out." Weller scowled. "I don't have time for that. There's a war to fight." "And you'll be no good to anyone if you burn out," Hayes shot back. "Look, I get it. We all want to be out there, fighting. But you just faced down a Zarkthian war mech with a piece of tech nobody understands. You need to rest. Let the eggheads figure out what's going on with that thing." Weller's grip tightened around the relic, its metal surface cool to the touch now. It had saved his life, saved all of them, but Hayes was right. There was something about the device, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just a weapon. It was more. And if he was going to keep using it, he needed to understand what that more was. "Fine," Weller relented, though the thought of sitting in a lab while the war raged on made his skin crawl. "But I'm not sitting on my ass for long. We've got ground to take back." Hayes smirked, clearly relieved by Weller's response. "Don't worry. Knowing you, you'll be back in the fight before the Zarkthians even realize what hit them." The dropship shuddered slightly as it broke through the atmosphere, the thick gray clouds parting to reveal the sprawling network of human bases below. In the distance, Weller could see the flicker of gunfire and explosions. Another skirmish, another battle for survival. It never stopped. As they approached the landing pad, the comms crackled with a familiar voice. "Lieutenant Hayes, this is command. You are cleared for landing at Base Sigma. Medical teams are on standby." Hayes glanced at Weller, raising an eyebrow. "Looks like they're rolling out the red carpet for you." "Lucky me," Weller grumbled. The dropship descended smoothly, its landing gear deploying with a soft hiss as it touched down on the reinforced platform. Outside, a team of medics and scientists were already waiting, their faces grim with a mix of awe and curiosity. Weller groaned inwardly. He hated being treated like some kind of specimen, but after what he'd done, he knew they wouldn't leave him alone anytime soon. As the doors slid open, the cold air rushed in, biting at Weller's skin. He stepped out onto the platform, the relic still clutched in his hand. The medics approached cautiously, their eyes darting between him and the device as though it might explode at any moment. "Sergeant Weller, we need to take you in for a full examination," one of them said, his voice professional but laced with apprehension. "The relic." "I'm keeping it," Weller interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can run your tests, but this stays with me." The medic hesitated but eventually nodded. "Understood." Weller followed them into the base, the sterile corridors a stark contrast to the war-torn landscape outside. As they led him to the medical bay, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the relic in his hand, heavier now than it had been before. There was something about it, something ancient and powerful, that seemed to resonate deep within him. As they entered the examination room, a tall, bespectacled scientist greeted them. His lab coat was pristine, but his face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much. "Sergeant Weller," he said, extending a hand. "Dr. Haynes, I've been briefed on your encounter." Weller nodded, shaking the man's hand. "Just another day on the front lines." Dr. Haynes chuckled dryly. "If only it were that simple. Please, take a seat. We need to run some preliminary scans before we do anything else." Weller sat on the edge of the examination table, his eyes flicking to the rows of equipment lining the walls. He wasn't a fan of all the tech, but he knew they were just trying to help. Still, the thought of being prodded and poked like some lab rat made his stomach churn. The scanner whirred to life, a soft blue light passing over him as the machines took their readings. Dr. Haynes watched the monitors intently, his brow furrowing as the data streamed in. After a few moments, he turned to Weller, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Weller asked, trying to keep the impatience out of his voice. Dr. Haynes hesitated before speaking. "Your vitals are stable, but there's something unusual about your neural activity. It's elevated far beyond what we'd expect, even in a combat situation." Weller raised an eyebrow. "Elevated how?" "Your brain is operating at a significantly higher capacity," Haynes explained, his voice growing more animated. "Increased synaptic activity, heightened cognitive function, faster reflexes. It's as though the relic has somehow enhanced your neurological capabilities." Weller stared at him, trying to process the information. "So, what? It made me smarter?" "In a sense, yes," Haynes replied, clearly fascinated. "But it's more than that. The relic isn't just a tool, it's interacting with you on a fundamental level, amplifying your mind's natural abilities. It's as though it's unlocking parts of your brain that humans normally don't have access to." Weller frowned, glancing down at the relic in his hand. He had felt it too, that surge of awareness, the clarity in the heat of battle. But now, hearing it explained, it sounded almost too good to be true. "And what happens when I stop using it?" he asked. Haynes sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's the part we don't know yet. The effects could be temporary, or they could be permanent. We need more data, more tests." Weller shook his head. "No more tests. Not right now." Dr. Haynes opened his mouth to protest, but Weller cut him off. I'll give you your data when this war is over. Until then, I need to be out there, fighting." Haynes looked conflicted, but eventually, he nodded. "Very well. But be careful, Sergeant. Whatever that relic is doing to you, it's not without risks." Weller stood, his body still aching but his mind sharper than ever. He didn't know how long the relic's effects would last, or what the long-term consequences might be, but he couldn't worry about that now. There was a war to win. He turned to Hayes, who had been waiting by the door. "Let's go. We've got a planet to take back." Hayes grinned, clapping him on the back. "That's the Weller I know." As they made their way back to the dropship, Weller couldn't shake the feeling that the relic was more than just a weapon. It was a key, one that could unlock not just the past, but humanity's future. And if the Zarthians thought they could stop him, they had no idea what they were up against. The dropship's engines roared as it sped back toward the front lines, the horizon ahead lit by the dull flashes of distant explosions. Weller sat in silence, gripping the relic tightly. He could feel it humming in his hand, its presence no longer just a weight, but something alive, something waiting. Hayes sat beside him, his eyes scanning a datapad, going over battle reports and updated orders. "Looks like the Zarthians are pushing hard on the Western Front," Hayes said, glancing up at Weller. "Our boys are holding, but just barely. They're going to need every bit of support they can get." Weller nodded, his mind already shifting to the fight ahead. He knew the relic was powerful, but there was still so much he didn't understand. What he did know was that the Zarthians had underestimated humanity's resolve and their weapons. And now, thanks to the relic, he had the firepower to prove it. The dropship shuddered as it hit turbulence, shaking them from side to side. Weller looked out through the small window, catching glimpses of the war-torn landscape below. Smoke billowed from burning cities, and flashes of gunfire danced across the ground like fireflies in the night. "How much longer until we're in the thick of it?" Weller asked, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. Hayes checked the readout. 10 minutes. We're being deployed directly into the forward command zone." "Good," Weller muttered. "I'm ready." As the minutes ticked by, Weller's thoughts turned to the relic again. The scientists at the base didn't fully understand what it was or how it worked, but he had felt the power coursing through him when he used it. He had seen the way the Zarthians faltered in the face of its might. They had laughed at humanity's old weapons, but they weren't laughing now. "Hey, Weller," Hayes said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You ever wonder why the Zarthians didn't see this coming? I mean, we've been fighting them for years, and they've always treated us like we're some backwater species. But now, with the relic and everything, it's like they never expected us to have this kind of edge." Weller leaned back against the cold metal of the dropship, thinking about it. "They think they're superior. They've got advanced tech, and they believe they've evolved beyond us. But what they don't understand is that we've been fighting with our backs against the wall for centuries. We know how to adapt, and we're stubborn as hell." Hayes chuckled, though there was a note of grim truth in his laugh. "Yeah, stubborn. That's one way to put it." Before Weller could respond, the dropship's pilot came over the comms. "Approaching drop zone. Get ready for deployment. It's hot down there." Weller stood up, securing his gear and checking his rifle. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline start to build, sharpening his senses and preparing him for battle. The relic thrummed in his hand, and he clipped it to his belt for now, ready to unleash it when the time came. As the dropship neared the ground, the sounds of war became clearer: gunfire, explosions, and the distant roar of Zarthian war machines. The ramp lowered, revealing the chaos of the battlefield below. Human forces were dug in, fighting tooth and nail to hold their positions against the Zarthian onslaught. Weller glanced at Hayes, who was already moving toward the exit. "Ready?" "Always," Hayes said with a grim smile. "Let's go remind them who they're dealing with." They charged down the ramp and hit the ground running, moving through the smoke and debris toward the forward command post. The air was thick with dust and the acrid stench of burning metal, but Weller barely noticed. His mind was focused on the battle ahead and on the relic at his side. As they approached the command post, they were greeted by the weary faces of soldiers who had been fighting for hours without rest. Their uniforms were tattered, their expressions grim, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes when they saw Weller and Hayes. "Sergeant Weller," one of the officers called out, waving them over. "We've been waiting for reinforcements, but the Zarks are pushing hard. We're not sure how much longer we can hold this position." "We're not here to hold," Weller said, his voice cold and determined. "We're here to push them back." The officer blinked, clearly taken aback by Weller's confidence, but he nodded quickly. "Understood. What's the plan?" Weller pulled the relic from his belt, feeling its weight in his hand. "We hit them with everything we've got, and when they think we're out of tricks, we hit them again." The officer glanced at the relic, his eyes widening slightly. "Is that—" "It is," Weller interrupted, "and it's going to give us the edge we need." Hayes stepped forward, his rifle at the ready. "We'll split into 2 teams. Weller and I will lead the main assault. You and your men flank from the west. Hit them hard and fast, don't give them time to react." The officer nodded, his face set in determination. "You heard the man. Let's move." As the soldiers scrambled to their positions, Weller and Hayes exchanged a glance. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The moment they would show the Zarkthians that humanity wasn't done yet, that their so-called outdated weapons were far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. "Ready?" Hayes asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Weller gripped the relic tightly, feeling its power pulse through him. "Ready." With a roar, they charged into the fray. The Zarkthians had set up a formidable defensive line, their advanced energy shields crackling with power as they repelled the human forces. But Weller didn't slow down. He could feel the relic in his hand, guiding him, amplifying his senses and reflexes. Every movement felt precise, every shot perfectly aimed. As they neared the enemy lines, Weller raised the relic high, its energy flaring to life. The Zarkthians hesitated for a split second, their confidence faltering as they saw the ancient device in his hand. That hesitation was all Weller needed. With a burst of energy, the relic unleashed its power, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The Zarkthian shields flickered and died, their energy drained by the relic's overwhelming force. Weller didn't stop. He fired his rifle, each shot finding its mark as the enemy lines crumbled under the relentless assault. Hayes was beside him, his rifle blazing as they tore through the Zarkthian forces. The human soldiers, emboldened by the sight of Weller's power, surged forward with renewed vigor. The Zarkthians, who had once mocked humanity's weapons as primitive, were now in full retreat. Weller pressed forward, his eyes locked on the retreating enemy. They had underestimated humanity. They had laughed at their old technology, their outdated weapons. But now they were running. And this was just the beginning. The Zarkthians' retreat was rapid, their once impenetrable formation now in complete disarray. Weller watched them flee, the hum of the relic fading in his grasp as the battlefield quieted, at least for now. The air around him was heavy with smoke and the faint echoes of gunfire, but the immediate threat was gone. The humans had won this round. Hayes panted beside him, the strain of battle etched on his face, but he wore a victorious grin. "That was something else," he said, wiping dirt and sweat from his brow. "I don't think they expected that." Weller didn't respond immediately. He was still gripping the relic, feeling its energy slowly settle. Even though it was dormant now, there was something unsettling about it. It had given him an overwhelming sense of control during the fight, but he wasn't sure what price it demanded in return. He clipped it back onto his belt, its weight still present in his mind. As the human forces regrouped, their cheers filled the air. Soldiers who had been on the brink of collapse now stood tall, energized by their victory. Medics rushed in to tend to the wounded, and officers barked orders, fortifying their positions for the next wave. Weller could see the glint of hope in their eyes. They knew this battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like they stood a chance. One of the commanders, a grizzled man with a thick beard and a scar running across his cheek, approached Weller and Hayes. "Hell of a show you put on out there," he said, his voice rough but respectful. "I've seen a lot in my years, but nothing like that. Whatever that thing is," he nodded toward the relic. "It turned the tide." "Yeah, well, it's not something we can rely on forever," Weller said, his voice measured. "We got lucky this time. We need to make sure we don't give the Zarks time to regroup." The commander grunted in agreement. "We're already working on it. Intel suggests they're pulling back to a secondary position about 20 clicks east. If we move fast, we can catch them before they dig in too deep." Weller looked out across the battlefield. The terrain was rough charred earth, craters from heavy artillery, and the twisted remains of buildings that once stood tall. It wouldn't be an easy push, but if they could keep the momentum going, they might just have a chance to push the Zarkthians back even further. "We don't give them time to breathe," Weller said. "Get your men ready. We move at dawn." The commander nodded and walked away, shouting orders to his subordinates. Weller watched him go, then turned to Hayes. "We're not done yet." Hayes smirked. "Never thought we were." They headed toward the command post, weaving through clusters of soldiers as they set up makeshift fortifications. Weller could feel the tension in the air despite the victory. Everyone knew the Zarkthians wouldn't stay down for long. This was a war of attrition, and the humans were fighting against an enemy with superior technology, greater numbers, and an almost fanatical belief in their own superiority. When they reached the command post, a low structure half buried in the earth, Weller and Hayes ducked inside. The air inside was cooler, the hum of machinery and the quiet chatter of officers a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Weller walked over to the central table, where a holographic map of the region was displayed. Red markers indicated known Zarkthian positions, while blue showed human forces. He studied the map, his mind working through potential strategies. Hayes leaned over the table, his finger tracing the Zarkthian retreat path. "They're heading east, right into rough terrain. If we can get some units around the side here," he pointed to a ridge that flanked the retreat route, "we could trap them in a crossfire." "It's a gamble," Weller said, frowning. "If they spot us before we get into position, we'll be exposed." "I know," Hayes said, "but it's a chance to crush them before they regroup." Weller was silent for a moment, weighing the risks. The relic gave them an edge, but it wasn't a guarantee, and he didn't like the idea of over-reliance on something he barely understood. Still, the opportunity was there, and in war, hesitation could be fatal. "All right," Weller said finally. "We'll do it. Get the units mobilized. We hit them hard and fast before they can dig in." Hayes nodded and immediately began relaying orders to the officers around the room. Weller remained at the table, his gaze fixed on the map, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the relic, on its power, and on what lay ahead. Hours passed as preparations were made. Weller and Hayes coordinated with the other commanders, ensuring that their forces were ready to strike at first light. The soldiers, though exhausted, moved with purpose, their spirits lifted by the earlier victory. As dawn approached, Weller stood on a small rise overlooking the camp. The first rays of sunlight were just beginning to break over the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield. He could see the distant figures of his troops, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. They were ready. Now it was up to him to lead them into the next fight. Hayes joined him, his expression serious. "Everything's in place. The flanking units are moving into position. We'll be ready to hit them as soon as you give the order." Weller nodded, his hand resting on the relic once again. He could feel it pulsing faintly, as if sensing the coming battle. He didn't know what the relic's limits were, or how far it could push him, but he had no choice but to rely on it for now. "They think they've seen everything we've got," Weller said, his voice low. "They're wrong." With that, he turned and began making his way toward the front lines. The soldiers fell in behind him, their weapons at the ready, their eyes focused on the path ahead. The tension in the air was palpable. Every man knew that this battle would be decisive. If they could crush the Zarkthians here, they could break their hold on this region and push them back even further. As they moved into position, Weller's mind raced. He thought about the Zarthians, their arrogance, their advanced technology. They had mocked humanity's weapons, scoffed at their tactics. But what they failed to understand was that humans had a history of making do with less, of turning the tables when the odds were against them. The Zarthians might have the edge in tech, but humanity had something else, something the enemy couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just the relic, it was the human spirit, the stubborn, unyielding will to survive and overcome. And as the sun finally broke free of the horizon, bathing the battlefield in golden light, Weller knew one thing for certain: they would win. They had to. The Zarthians might not fear humanity's old weapons, but they would fear what came next. The terrain had become a treacherous maze as Weller's squad pushed forward, flanked by rough cliffs on either side. The ground beneath their boots crunched with a thick layer of dust and cracked stone, evidence of past artillery bombardments that had reshaped the landscape into jagged, hostile formations. Every step took them closer to the Zarthian rearguard, but it was also a reminder of the brutal struggle that awaited. The sun, now fully risen, cast harsh light across the battlefield, its heat pounding relentlessly on the humans' armor-clad backs. "They've set up their defenses," Hayes muttered beside Weller, his binoculars pressed tightly to his face. "We've got artillery points along that ridge, and bunkers in the valley below. They're waiting for us." Weller nodded, his eyes scanning the cliffs to their left. The Zarthians had taken the higher ground, as expected, but their setup was hurried. There were gaps in their defense, blind spots that the humans could exploit. The key was timing. They couldn't afford to strike too early, nor too late. Behind them, the human flanking units moved silently through the rocky terrain, staying low to avoid detection. Their goal was to encircle the Zarthians, trapping them between the human force in the valley and the flanking teams on the ridges. But it had to be done in perfect sync. Weller's hand found the relic once more. He could feel its subtle vibration, almost like a second heartbeat, calming him in a strange way. The relic's power had proven itself time and time again, but it still unnerved him. He had seen what it could do, but he wasn't sure how it did it or what using it too much might cost him. "Everything's set," Hayes whispered, crouching next to him. "The flanking teams are in position. We wait for your signal." Weller glanced at the relic again, wondering if it could offer some insight, some final push that would guarantee their success. But he shook the thought away. They'd made it this far not because of the relic, but because of their tactics, their grit, and the unpredictability that humanity was known for. Weller raised his hand, signaling the final phase. This was it. A few moments of silence passed, each breath drawn carefully, each soldier poised on the brink of action. And then, in one swift motion, his hand dropped. The sky erupted with the sound of artillery fire. Explosions ripped through the Zarthian positions on the ridges, sending clouds of dust and debris cascading down into the valley. Weller watched as the once confident Zarthian forces scrambled for cover, their carefully laid plans collapsing in the face of the relentless assault. The humans had caught them off guard, striking faster and harder than they'd expected. "Go!" Weller barked, and his squad surged forward, rifles raised, feet pounding across the uneven ground. The air was thick with a scent of burning rock and the metallic tang of ionized air. Gunfire echoed off the cliffs, sharp and chaotic. Weller led the charge into the valley, his rifle barking as he picked off the disoriented Zarthians one by one. It was a slaughter. The enemy's superior technology had been rendered useless, their overconfidence shattered by the simplicity and savagery of human ingenuity. But amid the carnage, something didn't sit right with Weller. The Zarthians were retreating too fast. It was almost as if they wanted to be driven back. "Hayes!" Weller shouted, gesturing for his second in command to join him. Something's off. They're falling back too easily. Hayes, panting from the exertion, scanned the battlefield. You think it's a trap? I don't know, but they're not fighting like a cornered enemy. They're moving with too much purpose. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted behind them, near the human rear lines. Weller's blood ran cold as he turned to see a plume of smoke rising in the distance. The Zarkthians hadn't been retreating in panic, they'd been drawing the humans in. They're hitting our supply lines, Hayes shouted over the din of battle. Weller cursed under his breath. The Zarkthians had outmaneuvered them. While the humans had focused on crushing the forces in the valley, a secondary Zarkthian force had looped around, striking at their vulnerable rear positions. Ammunition, medics, and reinforcements, the lifeblood of their assault, were now under attack. We have to pull back, Hayes urged, grabbing Weller's arm. If they take out our supply lines, we're done. Weller's mind raced. The relic pulsed at his side, as if urging him to use it, to turn the tide once more. But Weller hesitated. This wasn't a battle that could be won with brute force alone. The Zarkthians had adapted, they weren't the arrogant fools they'd once been. We'll split our forces, Weller decided, his voice grim. You take half the men and secure the rear. I'll finish the job here. Hayes stared at him for a moment, then nodded. Got it. Just don't get yourself killed, all right? Weller offered a tight smile. Same to you. As Hayes and his team sprinted back toward the rear lines, Weller turned his attention to the battlefield. The Zarkthians in the valley were still putting up a fight, but their morale had been shattered. They were on the brink of collapse. If Weller could finish them off quickly, they'd have a chance to regroup and defend their supply lines before it was too late. He gripped his rifle tightly and charged forward, his boots kicking up dust as he fired at the retreating Zarkthians. His squad followed, their movements precise and deadly. The enemy was being pressed from all sides now, trapped between the flanking units and Weller's forward assault. As they neared the center of the valley, Weller spotted the Zarkthian commander, an imposing figure clad in ornate battle armor. He was shouting orders, trying desperately to rally his troops. Weller didn't hesitate. He aimed down his sights and squeezed the trigger. The commander's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. With their leader gone, the Zarkthian forces fell apart completely, their retreat turning into a rout. But Weller didn't allow himself a moment of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over yet. Secure the valley, he shouted to his men, and regroup at the ridge. As his soldiers began mopping up the last remnants of the Zarkthian forces, Weller's mind was already on the next phase of the fight. The rear lines were under attack, and if they didn't act fast, this victory would mean nothing. The relic pulsed at his side again, stronger this time, almost impatient. Weller glanced down at it, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He knew what it was capable of, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what it might demand of him. With a final glance at the smoldering battlefield, Weller turned and sprinted toward the rear lines. Weller raced across the uneven ground, his heart pounding as the sounds of battle intensified behind him. Explosions reverberated through the valley, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone. His thoughts swirled, replaying the last moments of the valley battle, the Zarkthians collapsing, their strategy unraveling. But now the rear lines were in jeopardy, and the cost of this battle could still spiral out of control. As he neared the ridge, the scene before him was even worse than he'd imagined. Zarkthian raiders had torn through the rear defenses with surgical precision. Human supply trucks lay smoldering, their cargo scattered across the rocky ground. The medics' tents had been overrun, and there were casualties everywhere. Even the ammunition depots had been hit, leaving the humans dangerously low on resources. Hayes was locked in a firefight with a group of Zarkthians, his squad trying to hold the line, but it was clear they were outnumbered. The Zarkthians moved like shadows, using the terrain to their advantage, ducking in and out of cover to unleash devastating volleys of plasma fire. "Weller, get down!" Hayes shouted as a plasma bolt sizzled past Weller's head. He dropped to the ground just in time, rolling behind the wreckage of a supply truck. The relic at his side buzzed with intensity, its power pressing against his thoughts. He could almost hear it whispering, urging him to tap into its energy. But Weller shoved the sensation aside. There was no time to lose himself in whatever mysterious power the relic held. He grabbed his rifle and peered over the smoldering debris. The Zarkthians were using advanced cloaking technology, flickering in and out of visibility as they advanced on the human position. Their weapons, sleek and deadly, cut through the human defenses like a hot knife through butter. But Weller knew something they didn't. Cloaks didn't stop kinetic rounds. Weller took a deep breath and aimed. He waited for one of the Zarkthians to shimmer into view, just for a split second. The moment he caught the faint outline of the enemy soldier, he fired. His bullet found its mark, striking the Zarkthian in the chest and sending it sprawling to the ground. The cloak shorted out, revealing the dead soldier in full view. One down. But there were more. Weller stayed low, firing off shots whenever a Zarkthian appeared. But the human forces were losing ground fast. They couldn't hold out much longer at this rate. His mind raced, trying to calculate their options. They couldn't retreat. Their backs were to a cliffside, and the supply lines were critical. But if they didn't find a way to turn the tide soon, the Zarkthians would wipe them out. The relic buzzed again, louder this time, almost insistent. Weller gritted his teeth. There had to be another way. Just then, Hayes slid into cover next to him, sweat and dirt streaking his face. "We can't hold this position much longer," he panted. "They've got us pinned down. We need to do something." Weller glanced around, his eyes narrowing. "We need to get to that high ground," he said, pointing to a rocky outcrop just above the battlefield. "From up there, we can set up a defensive position and rain down fire on them." Hayes followed his gaze and nodded. "It's risky. They'll see us coming." "Let them," Weller growled. "We've got to make a move, or we're dead." Hayes didn't argue. With a quick hand signal, Weller motioned for his remaining squad to regroup. They would need to move fast and hit hard, using the element of surprise to their advantage. The Zarkthians wouldn't expect a frontal assault on the high ground, not after pinning the humans down for so long. Weller's squad formed up behind him, their faces set in grim determination. He knew the stakes. They all did. There was no retreat, no fallback position. This was it. "On my mark," Weller said, gripping his rifle tightly. "We move fast and hit hard. No hesitation." He glanced down at the relic one last time. It hummed, pulsing with power, but Weller ignored it. They didn't need it. Not yet. "Go." The squad broke from cover, sprinting toward the high ground. Plasma fire rained down on them as the Zarkthians spotted their advance, but Weller and his men moved with precision, darting from one piece of cover to the next. The air crackled with energy, and the ground shook with the force of nearby explosions, but they kept moving, pushing through the chaos. Weller reached the base of the rocky outcrop and began climbing, his muscles straining as he pulled himself up the jagged surface. Behind him, Hayes and the rest of the squad followed, keeping their heads low as the Zarkthians tried to cut them down. But the humans were faster than the Zarkthians had anticipated. Within minutes, Weller reached the top, panting heavily as he crouched behind a boulder. He scanned the battlefield below, his eyes narrowing as he saw the Zarkthians' positions. They were spread out, focused on the valley where the human forces had been pinned down. They hadn't yet realized that Weller's squad had taken the high ground. "Now," Weller muttered to himself. He raised his rifle and opened fire. The rest of his squad followed suit, their bullets raining down on the Zarkthians below. The enemy soldiers scrambled for cover, but it was too late. Weller's team had the advantage now, and they weren't about to give it up. One by one, the Zarkthians fell, their cloaks flickering as they were struck down by the humans' kinetic rounds. The tide of battle had shifted in an instant, and the Zarkthians' advanced technology was once again rendered useless by the simplicity of human weaponry. Weller didn't let up. He kept firing, his jaw set in determination as he watched the Zarkthians retreat in disarray. Their once coordinated assault had crumbled, and now they were fleeing back toward the valley, where the human forces were already regrouping. But just as victory seemed within reach, Weller felt a chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shimmer, a flicker of movement at the edge of the ridge. He turned just in time to see a massive Zarkthian soldier, clad in advanced armor and wielding a plasma blade, charging toward him. Weller barely had time to react. He threw himself to the side as the plasma blade slashed through the air, narrowly missing him. The Zarkthian roared, its eyes glowing with fury as it swung the blade again, this time aiming for Weller's chest. Weller rolled to his feet, drawing his sidearm and firing at the Zarkthian's head. The bullets ricocheted off the armor, doing little more than denting it. The Zarkthian laughed, a guttural, menacing sound, and raised the blade for another strike. Weller's heart raced. He had seconds to act. His hand found the relic at his side. For the first time, he didn't hesitate. He gripped the relic tightly, feeling its power surge through him like a bolt of lightning. His vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to slow down, as if time itself had been bent to his will. The Zarkthian's blade hung in the air, inches from Weller's chest, moving in slow motion. Weller's mind raced, calculating the exact trajectory of the blade, the weak points in the Zarkthian's armor. The relic hummed in his hand, guiding him, filling him with a knowledge he didn't fully understand but couldn't question. With a surge of energy, Weller ducked beneath the blade and drove his sidearm into the Zarkthian's exposed neck, pulling the trigger twice. The rounds pierced the weak spot in the armor, and the Zarkthian staggered, blood pouring from the wound. Time seemed to snap back to normal as the massive soldier collapsed to the ground, the plasma blade falling from its hand with a dull thud. Weller stood over the body, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. The relic was silent. Weller stood over the fallen Zarkthian, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battlefield around him had grown quiet, too quiet. The remnants of the Zarkthian forces had withdrawn, their advance shattered by the human forces' strategic counterattacks. But Weller wasn't celebrating. His hand was still gripping the relic, its cool surface now resting silent against his palm. "Commander," Hayes's voice echoed from behind, and Weller turned to see his second-in-command making his way up the ridge, his squad close behind. "Are you all right?" Weller nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. "We held the line, but something's off." Hayes looked around, confusion crossing his face. "Off? The Zarkthians are retreating. We've driven them back." "It's not that," Weller muttered, staring at the relic in his hand. "This thing, it's connected to them somehow. The Zarkthians weren't fighting like they usually do. They were testing us. Testing our weapons, our tactics. And now they're pulling back too fast, too orderly. They've gotten what they came for." Hayes frowned. "You're saying this wasn't their real assault, after everything they threw at us?" Weller looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Exactly. This was a probing attack. They wanted to see how we'd respond, to see if our so-called outdated weapons were as primitive as they thought." "And now they know," Hayes said, his voice grim. "But we held them off. They'll think twice before coming back." "Maybe," Weller said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe now they know exactly what we're capable of, and they'll adjust their plans accordingly." As the squad regrouped, Weller took a deep breath and surveyed the damage. The humans had held their ground, but the cost had been steep. Casualties lay scattered across the battlefield, and the once pristine valley had been reduced to a wasteland of burning wreckage and smoldering craters. "We need to fall back and regroup," Weller said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "The Zarkthians won't stay gone for long. We need to prepare for their next move." The rest of the squad gathered their gear, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The relic hummed softly in Weller's hand, but he ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. There would be time to figure out what the strange device was later. For now, survival was their priority. The humans began their retreat, moving carefully through the devastated battlefield. As they made their way back to the main base, Weller's mind raced with possibilities. The Zarkthians had underestimated them this time, but the next battle wouldn't be so easy. They would return, stronger and more prepared, and when they did, humanity would have to be ready. Hours later, back at the human stronghold, Weller stood in front of a holographic map of the region, studying the Zarkthian movements. The relic buzzed quietly in his pocket, almost like a distant hum, but Weller forced himself to ignore its strange pull. "We need more information on the Zarkthian strategy," he said, addressing the command staff. "They're planning something big. This attack was just the beginning. We need to be ready for whatever's coming next." "Agreed," one of the officers replied, his expression grim. "We've already sent out scouting parties to monitor their movements, but so far, they've gone quiet. It's like they've vanished." "They haven't vanished," Weller said, shaking his head. "They're regrouping, preparing for something larger. We need to figure out what that is before they hit us again." Hayes stepped forward, his face tense with concern. "What about the relic? Do you think it's tied to their plans somehow?" Weller hesitated, his hand brushing against the pocket where the relic rested. "It's possible," he admitted, "but we don't know enough about it yet. It could be a weapon, a tool, a piece of technology we've never seen before. All I know is, it seems to resonate with the Zarkthians, almost like it's drawing them here. We need to figure out how to use it to our advantage," Hayes said. "If it's something the Zarkthians want, we might be able to turn the tide in our favor." "Maybe," Weller said, "but we have to be careful. Whatever this thing is, it's powerful, and I don't fully understand it yet. We can't afford to make mistakes." Before the discussion could continue, a sharp alarm echoed through the base, sending a jolt of adrenaline through the command room. Weller's head snapped up, and he locked eyes with Hayes. "Incoming transmission," one of the tech officers reported. "It's from the Zarkthian command." The room fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life. A towering Zarkthian general appeared before them, his reptilian features twisted into a cruel sneer. "Humans," the Zarkthian hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've put up an impressive fight, but your resistance is futile. We've analyzed your primitive weapons and tactics. They won't save you from what's coming." Weller crossed his arms, glaring at the projection. "What do you want?" The Zarkthian general's eyes glowed with malice. "Surrender. Lay down your arms, and we may spare a few of you as laborers for our empire. Resist, and we will burn your world to ash." Weller's jaw tightened. "We've heard that before." The Zarkthian laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. "This time, we're prepared. Your relic won't save you." Weller's blood ran cold. "How do you know about the relic?" "We know more than you think, human. The relic is ancient technology far beyond your understanding. It doesn't belong in your hands." Weller's mind raced. If the Zarkthians knew about the relic, they must have been after it all along. This wasn't just a battle for territory, it was a battle for control of something far more powerful than he had realized. "We'll never surrender," Weller said, his voice hard as steel. "If you want the relic, you'll have to take it from us." The Zarkthian general's eyes narrowed. "So be it." The transmission cut off, leaving the command room in tense silence. Hayes turned to Weller, his face pale. "They know about the relic. What do we do now?" Weller clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the relic in his pocket. "We prepare. The Zarkthians are coming for it, and we need to be ready." As the base erupted into a flurry of activity, Weller's thoughts turned inward. The Zarkthians had underestimated humanity once, mocking their outdated weapons and tactics. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. And Weller was ready to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology, but in their resolve. The tension in the base crackled like static in the air as the command staff scrambled to prepare for the impending Zarkthian onslaught. Weller stood at the center of the war room, surrounded by a holographic display that projected the Zarkthian forces regrouping in the region. "Recon teams are reporting heavy activity at their forward camps," one of the officers stated, his fingers dancing over a touchpad. "They're bringing in reinforcements, and it looks like they're gearing up for a full-scale assault." Weller nodded, his mind racing. We can't let them take the relic. If they get their hands on it, they could reverse engineer its technology. We need to think outside the box, rely on strategies that will catch them off guard. Hayes stepped closer, his expression tense. What do you have in mind? We can't just charge at them with our standard tactics. They'll be prepared. Weller rubbed his chin, considering the situation. We need to create distractions, hit them where they least expect it. If we can divide their forces, we might stand a chance of getting to their command center. Hayes raised an eyebrow. And how do you suggest we create these distractions? The relic. We can use it to our advantage. If it truly resonates with the Zarkthians, it might draw them and distract them long enough for us to execute our plan. The room fell silent as the implications sunk in. Using the relic as bait was risky, but Weller knew they were out of options. If the Zarkthians were determined to retrieve it, they had to turn that determination against them. What about the logistics? Another officer interjected. We'll need a small team to execute this plan, while the rest of us hold the line. I'll lead the team, Weller declared, his voice firm. Hayes, you'll be in command here. If anything goes wrong, I'll need you to pull the forces back and regroup. Hayes hesitated, concern etched on his face. What if you get trapped? The Zarkthians won't hesitate to destroy you if they think you have the relic. I'm counting on that, Weller replied, a fierce determination burning in his chest. If they think they can eliminate me and take the relic, they'll overextend themselves. We'll use that against them. After a brief pause, Hayes nodded, though doubt still flickered in his eyes. All right, just be careful. As the preparations began, Weller gathered a small team of elite soldiers, all of them ready to follow him into the fray. Each man knew the risks, but they were driven by a singular purpose: to protect humanity's future, no matter the cost. As night fell, Weller and his team made their way to the outskirts of the Zarkthian encampment. The air was thick with tension, the sound of distant machinery humming ominously in the darkness. Weller glanced at the relic, its surface gleaming faintly under the moonlight. He could almost feel its power thrumming beneath his fingertips. Stay sharp, everyone, Weller said, his voice low but steady. We're going in quiet. Once we activate the relic, we need to create chaos and get out fast. The soldiers nodded, their expressions serious. Weller took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. They had trained for moments like this, but nothing could truly prepare them for the reality of combat against a technologically superior enemy. As they approached the Zarkthian camp, Weller signaled for the team to spread out, taking positions behind scattered debris. He could see the massive forms of the Zarkthian soldiers moving about, their reptilian features light by the flickering lights of their equipment. The camp was bustling with activity, and Weller's heart raced at the thought of what they were about to do. On my mark, Weller whispered, holding the relic close to his chest. It pulsed softly, almost in sync with his heartbeat. 3, 2, 1, now. Weller activated the relic, its hum growing louder as it sent out a pulse of energy that rippled through the air. The response was immediate. The Zarkthians froze, their attention snapping toward the source of the disturbance. Weller's heart raced as he watched the creatures converge, their eyes glowing with intensity as they sought the relic. Move, Weller shouted, and his team sprang into action, darting through the shadows toward the command tent at the center of the camp. As they moved, the Zarkthians began to react. Alarms blared, and soldiers shouted in their guttural language, scrambling to respond to the unexpected intrusion. Weller felt a thrill of adrenaline surge through him. This was what they had trained for, and they were executing their plan flawlessly. They reached the command tent, a massive structure at the heart of the camp, heavily fortified and guarded by a squad of elite Zarkthian warriors. Weller exchanged glances with his team, and without a word, they prepared to breach. On my signal, Weller whispered, raising his weapon. 3, 2, 1. They burst into the tent, weapons raised, and the Zarkthian guards barely had time to react. A fierce firefight erupted, the sound of gunfire echoing against the metallic walls. Weller and his team fought with precision, each soldier executing their training flawlessly as they took down the Zarthians with a combination of brute force and strategic maneuvering. The relic buzzed in Weller's pocket, seeming to respond to the chaos around them. The Zarthian soldiers fought fiercely, but the humans were driven by desperation and the desire to protect their home. One by one, the guards fell, and soon Weller stood at the center of the tent, surveying the devastation. "Secure the area," Weller shouted, keeping his eyes on the door in case reinforcements arrived. "We need to find their command center and extract whatever information we can about their plans." As his team moved to secure the perimeter, Weller approached a console at the back of the tent, its screens flickering with data. He quickly began accessing the system, searching for any clues about the Zarthian strategy. The relic's hum intensified, almost drowning out the sounds of the battle outside. Suddenly, one of the soldiers called out, his voice urgent. "Commander, we've got incoming Zarthians' heavy reinforcements." Weller's heart raced as he glanced at the screen, which displayed a series of coordinates. "We have to move. We can't let them surround us." But before they could retreat, the ground shook beneath them, and the console exploded in a shower of sparks. Weller was thrown back, his vision swimming as he struggled to regain his bearings. When he finally sat up, the tent was in disarray. His team was regrouping, but the sound of approaching Zarthians filled the air. "We need to fall back," Hayes shouted, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "Now." Weller nodded, forcing himself to his feet. The relic was still pulsing in his pocket, almost as if it sensed the urgency of the moment. He turned to his team, determination flooding his veins. "Let's go. We can't leave without that intel." As they fought their way back through the chaos of the camp, Weller felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The Zarthians were closing in, but he refused to back down. They had come too far, and he wouldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. In a burst of speed, Weller led his team toward the rear exit of the camp, hoping to slip away undetected. But as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of elite Zarthian warriors, their eyes burning with rage. The Zarthians charged, and Weller's instincts kicked in. He raised his weapon and fired, taking down the first alien before moving to the next. The firefight erupted again, and for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to the sounds of gunfire and the pounding of his heart. But just as hope began to fade, Weller felt the relic vibrate violently in his pocket. The ground shook beneath them once more, and a blinding flash of energy erupted from the relic, surging outward and knocking the Zarthians off their feet. Weller shielded his eyes, and when he looked again, the Zarthians were disoriented, struggling to rise. It was their chance. "Now, push forward." With a renewed sense of purpose, Weller and his team charged through the disarray, moving quickly toward the perimeter of the camp. The Zarthians, still reeling from the relic's burst, struggled to mount a counterattack. As they reached the edge of the camp, Weller looked back at the chaos they had created. The relic had done more than just create a distraction, it had shifted the tide of battle, giving them the window they needed to escape. "Keep moving," Weller urged, his voice resolute. "We're not out of this yet." They sprinted through the trees, hearts racing, as they pushed further away from the chaos. Behind them, the Zarthians regrouped, their angry shouts echoing through the night. "We need to regroup with the main forces," Hayes said, panting as they moved. "They'll come after us. We can't let them find us alone." "Agreed," Weller replied, glancing at the relic still humming in his pocket. "We need to analyze what we got from that command center. We can't let this momentum go to waste." As they reached a clearing, Weller felt a surge of triumph. They had survived the encounter and secured valuable intel that could turn the tide against the Zarthians. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. They had ignited the wrath of a relentless enemy, and the fight was far from over. The night sky was a canopy of stars as Weller and his team navigated through the dense forest. The sounds of their heavy breaths and hurried footsteps filled the air, mingling with the distant roars of Zarthian war cries echoing behind them. The adrenaline from the battle began to fade, replaced by an urgent need to regroup and assess their next steps. Status check, Weller said, slowing to catch his breath. Is everyone accounted for? All present, Hayes replied, glancing around. The relief was palpable, but so was the tension. We need to get back to base and debrief ASAP. That intel could change everything. As they moved deeper into the forest, the weight of the relic in Weller's pocket felt both reassuring and ominous. It had saved them, but its true nature remained a mystery. He could still feel its hum resonating within him, almost as if it were a living entity. They finally broke through the tree line and emerged onto a narrow path that led back to their command center. Weller motioned for the team to stay low and keep quiet, but even in their cautious approach, he could feel the eyes of the forest watching them. "Commander," one of the soldiers spoke up, "do you really think the relic will keep them off our backs for long? They're going to be hunting for us now." "I know," Weller replied, his mind racing. "But if we can figure out how to use it, we might just have the upper hand. We need to turn the tide of this conflict. We need to analyze the data we extracted from the command center and learn everything we can about the Zarkthians." As they made their way along the path, the glow of the command center came into view, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. But as they approached, Weller felt a chill run down his spine. Something was off. "Hold up," he whispered, raising a hand to signal his team to stop. They paused, listening intently. The sounds of activity inside the command center were muted, as if the usual bustling energy had been replaced with an eerie silence. "Do you hear that?" Hayes asked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. "It's too quiet." Weller felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Stay alert. We might not be alone." As they moved cautiously toward the entrance, Weller took point, leading his team inside. The dimly lit hallways were empty, and the air was thick with tension. He gestured for them to spread out, their weapons at the ready. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the corridors, followed by a series of explosions that rocked the building. Weller's heart raced as he dashed toward the source of the commotion, the urgency of their mission overwhelming any sense of fear. "Commander," one of the soldiers called out as they neared the central control room. "We're under attack. Zarkthians breached the perimeter." Weller's mind raced. "We need to defend this position. Gather everyone and prepare for a counterattack." They reached the control room, where the last line of defense was forming. The chaos of the Zarkthians' assault surged around them, and Weller's team joined the fray, repelling the alien invaders with a fierce determination. The Zarkthians, relentless and brutal, surged forward, their advanced weaponry flashing in the dim light. Weller's squad fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered, and the situation grew desperate. Weller caught sight of the console, where the data they had collected from the Zarkthian command center awaited analysis. "Hayes, get the data off that console now," he shouted, his voice rising above the din of battle. Hayes nodded, sprinting toward the console as Weller and the others held the line. The sounds of gunfire and alien shrieks filled the air, drowning out everything else. Weller fought with everything he had, dodging and weaving through the chaos, determined to protect his team. The Zarkthians were overwhelming, and he felt the weight of despair creeping in. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a bright light exploded from the direction of the relic. Weller turned to see the relic pulsing with energy, its power resonating through the room. It emitted a shockwave that knocked several Zarkthians off their feet, causing them to stumble and lose their footing. The sight filled Weller with renewed hope. "Use the relic, use its power," he shouted to his team. "We can turn this around." Hayes, still at the console, glanced back at Weller. "It's reacting to the energy around us. If we can channel it, we might be able to unleash something powerful enough to push them back." Weller nodded, adrenaline surging through him. "Let's do it. Everyone, focus on the relic. We need to harness its energy." As the soldiers turned their attention to the relic, Weller could feel the air crackle with potential. They gathered around it, forming a protective barrier as the Zarkthians pressed forward. "Concentrate," Weller urged, feeling the energy pulse through him as well. The relic glowed brighter, and a wave of power surged outward, light the control room in an otherworldly light. With one united effort, they channeled their focus into the relic, and it unleashed a powerful blast that surged through the control room, striking the Zarkthian forces. The shockwave rippled outward, sending Zarkthians flying as the energy coursed through the room. Weller felt exhilarated as the tide of battle shifted in their favor. The Zarkthians, momentarily stunned, faltered, giving the humans the chance they needed to regroup and mount a counteroffensive. "Push forward, now," Weller shouted, leading the charge as his team rallied behind him, weapons raised and ready. The Zarkthians were disoriented, and the humans took advantage of the confusion, cutting through their ranks with renewed vigor. As they fought, Weller kept an eye on Hayes, who was still working at the console, desperately trying to extract every piece of information from the Zarkthian systems. "Hayes, any luck?" he shouted over the noise. "Almost there, just a little longer," Hayes replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'm downloading their strategic plans and troop movements. This could change everything." With each passing moment, the Zarkthians grew more desperate. Their initial advantage was fading as the humans pressed their assault. Weller could feel the momentum shifting, and he pushed harder, determined to finish the fight. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Hayes pulled away from the console. "I got it. We have the intel," he yelled, grinning from ear to ear. "Now let's get out of here," Weller commanded, feeling the weight of victory settle over him. "Fall back to the extraction point. We've got what we need." As they retreated, Weller glanced back at the chaos unfolding behind them. The relic's power had turned the tide, giving them the upper hand they needed to escape. They charged through the corridors, pushing back any Zarkthians who tried to block their way. Finally, they reached the extraction point, where a transport ship awaited them. The pilot was already preparing for takeoff, and Weller ushered his team on board. "Go, go, go," he shouted, urgency clear in his voice as they piled into the ship. The Zarkthians were regrouping, and Weller knew they needed to leave before reinforcements arrived. As the ship's engines roared to life, Weller took a moment to catch his breath, glancing around at his team. They had fought against the odds and emerged victorious, but the battle was far from over. "Prepare for launch," the pilot called, and Weller felt a rush of anticipation. They had the intel, the relic, and a chance to turn the tide in humanity's favor. As the ship lifted off, Weller gazed out at the burning remnants of their command center, a bittersweet reminder of the price they had paid. But deep inside, he felt a sense of hope. They had proven their strength against a seemingly invincible foe, and now they were armed with the knowledge they needed to fight back. As the ship soared into the night sky, Weller knew they had only scratched the surface of what was to come. They would need to regroup, strategize, and prepare for the inevitable counteroffensive. But this time, they would do it on their terms, with the relic and the hard-won intel fueling their resolve. As the transport ship soared through the atmosphere, the crew members were silent, the weight of their recent battle hanging heavy in the air. Weller stared out at the stars, feeling a mix of exhilaration and dread. They had escaped the chaos, but the Zarkthians were still out there, and their forces were formidable. "Commander," Hayes interrupted his thoughts, looking up from the console. "I've got the data downloaded and ready for analysis. If we can decipher their battle plans and troop movements, we can formulate a counter-strategy." "Good work, Hayes," Weller replied, grateful for the focus on the task at hand. "Get it sorted. We need every advantage we can muster." The rest of the team busied themselves with repairs and tending to minor injuries. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, forged through fire and adversity. They had survived a fierce battle, but they all knew that victory was a fragile thing. As the transport made its approach to the secure base, Weller stood, moving to the front of the ship where the pilot, a seasoned veteran named Reyes, was navigating the landing sequence. "Reyes, how long until we're on the ground?" Weller asked, feeling the tension in his gut. "Just a few more minutes, Commander." "We'll touch down shortly," Reyes replied, eyes fixed on the controls. "I'm picking up chatter on the Zarkthian frequencies. They're organizing a response to our escape. We need to hurry." Weller's heart sank. The Zarkthians were nothing if not persistent. Keep us updated, and let's make sure we're ready to move as soon as we land. I don't want to stick around for a welcome party." Moments later, the transport ship settled onto the landing pad with a heavy thud, the engines winding down. Weller felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew better than to let his guard down. As the ramp lowered, a squad of soldiers greeted them, weapons at the ready. Weller stepped out first, scanning the area. The base was quiet, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an air of unease. "Get everyone inside and secure the perimeter," Weller ordered, his voice steady. "We're not out of the woods yet." Inside the command center, the atmosphere was tense. Officers hurried around, compiling reports and coordinating defenses. Weller quickly found the operations room, where he could already see several key members of the team poring over screens filled with data. "Commander," Major Elkins called out as Weller entered. "We were just reviewing the Zarthian transmissions you brought back. This intel is invaluable. If we can decipher their plans, we might have a fighting chance." "Let's get to work, then," Weller said, moving closer to the screens. "What do we have?" Hayes joined him, pulling up a map of the area. "From the data we extracted, it looks like they're planning a counterattack on our base. They've identified our position and are mobilizing their forces." Weller felt the tension rise as he absorbed the information. "How long do we have?" "Less than an hour, at most," Elkins replied, her eyes narrowing. "They're moving quickly, but if we can anticipate their strategy, we might be able to repel their assault." "Then we need to come up with a plan," Weller said, his mind racing. "We can't let them catch us off guard." They quickly began strategizing, using the intel to map out defensive positions and anticipate the Zarthian tactics. Weller felt the adrenaline coursing through him, igniting his resolve. They were about to face their toughest challenge yet, but he wouldn't back down. "Let's fortify our defenses. We'll set up heavy weaponry at key choke points and deploy snipers to cover the perimeter," Weller instructed, rallying the team. "We need to create a stronghold that they won't easily breach." As the soldiers moved to implement the plan, Weller caught a glimpse of the relic resting on a table in the corner. Its glow pulsed softly, a reminder of the power they had tapped into during the last battle. He felt an urge to understand it better, to unlock its potential as an asset in the impending confrontation. "Hayes, can you run some diagnostics on the relic?" Weller asked, his eyes fixed on the ancient object. "I want to know everything we can about its capabilities." "On it," Hayes replied, already pulling up the necessary data on the console. As the team worked tirelessly, preparing for the Zarthian assault, Weller felt a sense of urgency. The relic had given them a glimpse of hope, but it was clear they needed more than just hope to survive. "Commander," a soldier called out, rushing into the operations room. "We've got movement on the radar. Zarthian ships are approaching fast." "Ready the defenses," Weller shouted, adrenaline spiking as the gravity of the situation set in. "We don't have much time." The team sprang into action, manning weapon stations and taking their positions. Weller stood at the front, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the radar. The Zarthians were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had reclaimed their perceived dominance. "Here they come," someone shouted as the first wave of Zarthian ships came into view, their sleek forms slicing through the sky. Weller felt a rush of determination. This was their moment to prove themselves, to show the Zarthians that humanity would not back down. "Hold your fire until they're within range," he ordered, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. As the ships descended closer, Weller's focus sharpened. The Zarthians unleashed their assault, lasers firing toward the base, but Weller remained resolute. "Now, open fire." The air erupted with a cacophony of gunfire as humanity's defenders fought back against their alien foes. Explosions lit the night sky, and Weller felt the ground shake beneath him as he directed his team with fierce determination. "Keep them off the ground. Don't let them establish a landing zone," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. As they battled, Weller caught a glimpse of the relic glowing brighter in the corner of the operations room. He could feel its energy pulsing, almost urging him to harness its power once more. Hayes, if we can channel the relic's energy into our weapon systems, it might give us the boost we need, Weller called out, desperation creeping into his voice. I'm on it, Hayes shouted back, working furiously at the console. With renewed resolve, Weller focused on the fight, coordinating his team as they pushed back against the relentless onslaught of Zarkthian forces. The tide of battle swayed, and he could feel the energy shifting in their favor. Commander, we've established a connection to the relic, Hayes shouted. It's ready to amplify our weapons. Do it, Weller ordered, feeling a surge of hope. As Hayes activated the connection, the relic's energy surged through their systems, enhancing their weaponry and giving the humans a newfound strength. They fought back with a ferocity they hadn't possessed before, their outdated weapons now firing with the force of advanced technology. Push them back, Weller urged, the thrill of the fight fueling his determination. The Zarkthians faltered, their advance stalling as humanity unleashed a torrent of firepower. The battle raged on, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning debris. Weller felt the adrenaline course through him, each victory over the Zarkthians igniting his spirit. As the last Zarkthian ship fell from the sky, Weller let out a triumphant roar. They had done the impossible. They had fought back against a foe that had underestimated them. Status report, Weller commanded, scanning the area for signs of survivors. Minimal casualties, Commander. We held them off, a soldier replied, his voice brimming with relief. Weller felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Good work, everyone. Now, let's regroup and analyze the intel we've gathered. This battle is just the beginning. As the team celebrated their hard-won victory, Weller couldn't shake the feeling that the Zarkthians would return. They had tested humanity's resolve, but now, with the relic in their possession, Weller knew they were ready to fight back with everything they had. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. Humanity would rise to meet the challenge, armed with newfound strength and an unyielding spirit. They would not be mocked again. With the Zarkthian assault repelled, a cautious calm settled over the base. Weller paced through the command center, the glow of monitors casting eerie shadows across his face. Reports flooded in, each more encouraging than the last. Their defenses had held, but the victory felt bittersweet. The remnants of the Zarkthian fleet were already regrouping. He could feel it in his bones. Commander, Major Elkins approached, a stack of reports in her arms. The analysis of the data we recovered is complete. The Zarkthians are reorganizing and planning a larger offensive. They've mobilized forces from several surrounding systems. Weller took the reports, scanning the figures. How long do we have before they launch their next attack? 3 days, at most. They'll come back stronger, and they won't underestimate us again, she said, her brow furrowed with concern. Then we need to be ready. We have to turn this victory into a turning point. Gather all available forces and reinforce our defenses. We'll also begin training on the relic's capabilities. It's time to harness its power for the fight ahead. Elkins nodded, her determination mirroring his own. I'll coordinate the training and ensure we maximize our weapon system's potential. As the team worked tirelessly, Weller felt a fire igniting within him. They had proven themselves in battle, but it wasn't enough. The Zarkthians had challenged them, and now they needed to show their true strength. In the following days, the atmosphere around the base transformed. Soldiers trained with renewed vigor, honing their skills and integrating the relic's energy into their weapons. The sound of gunfire rang out as they practiced drills, and the camaraderie among the troops grew stronger. Meanwhile, Weller sought counsel from the scientific team studying the relic. He needed to understand its origins and capabilities better. Dr. Tran, a leading expert in ancient technology, was eager to assist. Commander, the relic appears to be a power source, but it also has some form of consciousness, she explained, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It resonates with human emotions, enhancing the effectiveness of our weapons. If we can learn to communicate with it, we might unlock even greater potential. Then we need to make that our priority, Weller replied. If we can forge a bond with the relic, we may stand a chance against the next Zarkthian wave. Days turned into nights, and the base was a hive of activity. Weller felt the pressure mounting as the Zarkthians prepared for their counteroffensive. Finally, the day arrived. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson hue over the sky, the base was on high alert. The monitors flashed warnings, indicating Zarkthian ships entering their system. Weller gathered his command team in the operations room. "Everyone, listen up," he called, his voice firm and clear. "We've trained hard for this moment. We've proven that humanity can stand against the odds, and now we must show the Zarkthians that we are a force to be reckoned with. They may have mocked our weapons, but today we'll turn their arrogance into ashes." Cheers erupted from the team, the determination in the room palpable. Weller felt a surge of hope. They were ready. "Hayes, feed the battle plans into the systems. We'll set up a defensive perimeter and anticipate their movements," Weller instructed. "Already on it, Commander," Hayes replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Major Elkins, I want our best snipers positioned at strategic points. They'll need to take out any incoming targets before they reach our defenses." "Consider it done," Elkins confirmed, her eyes gleaming with focus. As the Zarkthian fleet approached, Weller stood at the front of the command center, his heart pounding. The time for waiting was over. It was time to fight. "Prepare for battle," he shouted as alarms blared throughout the base. The team rushed to their positions, adrenaline fueling their movements. "Zarkthian ships have entered firing range," a soldier reported, urgency lacing their voice. "Open fire," Weller commanded, watching as their defenses unleashed a barrage of firepower. The air crackled with energy as the relic's power surged through their weapons, amplifying their attacks. The battle unfolded with a ferocity that tested their resolve. Zarkthian ships descended from the skies, their sleek forms darting through the air like predators hunting prey. Weller coordinated the assault, calling out orders as chaos erupted around him. "Snipers, take out the lead ships. We need to disrupt their formation." He watched as the soldiers executed their commands with precision. Each shot found its mark, and the Zarkthians were thrown into disarray. But they fought back fiercely, their advanced weaponry striking against the base's defenses. Explosions rocked the ground, but Weller remained resolute. "We can't let them regroup. Keep pushing forward," he shouted, determination coursing through him. The relic's energy flowed into their weapons, igniting them with an otherworldly power. Weller felt it resonate within him, amplifying his instincts as he fought alongside his team. But the Zarkthians were relentless. As their forces pressed on, Weller felt the tide of battle shifting. "Commander, they're overwhelming our defenses," Hayes shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Not on my watch," Weller replied, glancing at the relic. "If they could harness its full potential, they might turn the tide once and for all." "Dr. Tran, can we amplify the relic's energy output?" he called out. "I can try, but it'll take time," she replied, eyes darting to the screens filled with chaotic images of battle. "Do it. We'll cover you." Weller and the team pushed back against the Zarkthians, using every ounce of strength and determination to hold their ground. The relic pulsed with energy, and Weller could feel it growing stronger as they fought. "Just a little longer," Weller urged, dodging incoming fire and returning fire with renewed ferocity. Finally, Dr. Tran shouted, "I've done it. The relic is ready." "Then let's unleash it," Weller commanded. The relic's energy surged through their systems, amplifying their weaponry to unprecedented levels. As they unleashed a torrent of firepower, the Zarkthians were caught off guard. Ships exploded in spectacular fashion, and Weller felt a rush of exhilaration. "Push them back! We can win this!" he shouted, the thrill of victory electrifying the air. With their renewed strength, humanity fought back against the Zarkthians with a ferocity they had never known before. Each moment felt like a turning point, and Weller could see the tide shifting. As the last of the Zarkthian ships fell from the sky, Weller stood amidst the chaos, breathing heavily but filled with pride. They had done it. They had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. "Status report," he called out, his heart pounding with adrenaline. "Minimal casualties." "Commander, we held them off!" a soldier shouted, the room erupting in cheers. Weller felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had fought and won, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Zarthians would return, and humanity would need to be ready. "Let's regroup and assess our defenses. We've shown them our strength, but we need to fortify our position. Prepare for the next encounter. We will not be caught off guard again." As the team celebrated their victory, Weller looked up at the stars, knowing that humanity's fight was far from over. They had mocked his kind and underestimated their resolve, but now they would learn that humanity would always rise to the challenge. And in that moment, Weller made a silent vow to himself and his team. They would continue to fight, to adapt, and to evolve, ensuring that they would never be the underdogs again. In the aftermath of their hard-won victory, the base buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. Weller stood at the heart of the operations center, surrounded by maps and screens displaying intelligence reports. The Zarthian forces had retreated for now, but Weller knew that they would soon return. "Commander, we've intercepted communications indicating that the Zarthians are regrouping and preparing for another attack," Major Elkins reported, her tone serious. "They're not just coming back, they're bringing everything they have." "Then we need to make sure we're ready for them," Weller replied, a steely resolve setting in. "We'll fortify our defenses and prepare a counteroffensive. It's time to show the Zarthians that we're not just defenders, we're conquerors." In the following days, the atmosphere within the base shifted from mere survival to aggressive preparation. They reinforced the perimeter with heavy artillery and set up defensive systems, integrating the relic's technology into their battle plans. Dr. Tran and her team worked tirelessly, analyzing the relic's properties and discovering new ways to harness its power. "Commander, we've developed a prototype that can channel the relic's energy into a concentrated blast," she announced one day, her excitement palpable. "If we can aim this correctly, it could cripple their fleet in one strike." "Make it our primary weapon," Weller instructed, his mind racing with possibilities. "If we can catch them off guard with a show of overwhelming force, it might buy us enough time to push them back for good." As the days passed, the base transformed into a fortress. Soldiers trained tirelessly, melding their skills with the enhanced weaponry and strategies inspired by the relic. Weller felt a sense of pride swelling within him. They had come together as a unified force, ready to face whatever the Zarthians threw at them. Then, just as he anticipated, the alarm blared across the base. The monitors flickered to life, revealing the approaching Zarthian fleet, larger and more formidable than before. "Battle stations," Weller shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "Prepare the prototype weapon. We'll catch them off guard as they enter our range." The troops moved with practiced precision, taking their positions as the Zarthians drew closer. Weller's heart raced as he watched the enemy fleet descend, their ships glinting menacingly in the light of the sun. "Commander, they're deploying boarding parties," Elkins warned, pointing at the screens displaying the Zarthians launching smaller craft toward the base. "Hold the perimeter. We can't let them breach our defenses," Weller commanded, his voice booming above the chaos. The battle began in earnest, and the base shook with the force of explosions. Humanity fought with a fury that surprised even Weller. Each soldier, fueled by their recent victory, fought fiercely to defend their home. "Activate the prototype weapon," Weller shouted as the Zarthians surged forward. "Charging," a technician yelled back, fingers flying across the control panel. "Ready in 3, 2, 1. "Fire!" Weller's command echoed through the command center. The weapon discharged with a deafening roar, a beam of concentrated energy slicing through the air. It struck the heart of the Zarthian formation, resulting in a cataclysmic explosion. Ships erupted in a blaze of light and debris, and Weller felt a surge of triumph. "Push forward, they're disorganized," he commanded, rallying his troops. With the prototype weapon wreaking havoc among the Zarthians, humanity pressed the advantage. Soldiers fought bravely, taking down boarding parties with lethal efficiency. Weller led the charge, his heart pounding with adrenaline as he faced the enemy head-on. "Keep moving. We need to cut off their escape routes." The tide of battle turned in their favor, and the Zarthians, once so confident, now struggled against the relentless assault. But Weller knew they wouldn't give up easily. Their defeat could lead to drastic measures, and he had to be prepared for anything. Suddenly, a massive Zarthian cruiser broke formation, its weapons charged and aimed directly at the base. "Commander, that ship is targeting us," Elkins shouted. "Divert all power to the shields. Prepare to fire the prototype again," Weller barked, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As the cruiser unleashed its onslaught, the base shook violently. Energy blasts slammed against their shields, straining against the force. Weller gritted his teeth, willing their defenses to hold. "Now, fire!" The prototype weapon roared to life, unleashing its energy toward the cruiser. The blast hit its mark, causing the ship to shudder violently, its shields flickering as Weller's forces pressed the attack. "Focus fire on that cruiser. We can't let it recover," he ordered, watching as the crew poured fire into the vessel, ripping it apart piece by piece. With a final explosion, the cruiser fell, its remnants scattering across the battlefield. Cheers erupted from the troops, the morale soaring as they pushed deeper into Zarthian territory. But then Weller noticed a massive energy spike on the monitors. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, studying the readings. The Zarthians were activating a weapon of their own. A glowing orb began to materialize on the lead cruiser, its energy building ominously. "Major, we need to take that ship out before it fires." "I'm on it," Elkins replied, urgency in her voice. "Focus all fire on that cruiser. We need to destroy it now." The troops obeyed, pouring everything they had into the enemy ship. Weller watched as the Zarthian crew scrambled, desperately trying to launch their weapon. Come on," he urged, tension coiling in his stomach. Finally, just as the energy orb reached its peak, Weller's forces unleashed one final barrage. The cruiser exploded in a blinding flash, and the energy orb dissipated into nothingness. A wave of relief washed over Weller as he realized they had done it. They had turned the tide. The remaining Zarthians, seeing their command ship fall, began to retreat, scattering into the vastness of space. "Commander, they're breaking formation. They're fleeing," a soldier shouted, disbelief coloring their voice. "Good. Let them run," Weller said, his voice steady. "We've sent a message they won't forget." As the last of the Zarthian fleet vanished into the depths of space, cheers erupted in the command center. The battle was won, but Weller knew the war was far from over. The Zarthians would return, more determined than ever. "We need to regroup and prepare for their next assault," Weller said, his tone resolute. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of our fight for survival." The team rallied around him, united in their determination. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but the scars of battle lingered. Humanity had proven itself against a formidable foe, and they would not forget the lessons learned. As Weller gazed out at the stars, he felt a sense of pride swell within him. They had fought not just for survival, but for the future of humanity, and though the Zarthians may have mocked them, they had learned a valuable lesson. Humanity was far more resilient than they could ever have imagined. In the months that followed, humanity rebuilt and fortified their defenses, preparing for the inevitable return of the Zarthians. The relic became a symbol of hope, a testament to their strength and unity in the face of adversity. Weller led the charge in securing alliances with neighboring systems, expanding their network of support and ensuring that they were not alone in this fight. News of their victory spread throughout the galaxy, and others began to take notice of humanity's resolve. As they forged new alliances and advanced their technology, Weller knew that the next confrontation would come, but they would be ready. Humanity had risen from the ashes of underestimation, and they would continue to fight for their place in the galaxy. Standing on the command deck, overlooking the stars, Weller couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had faced a formidable enemy and emerged victorious. They had proven that humanity's strength lay not just in their weapons, but in their indomitable spirit. And as the stars twinkled in the vast expanse of space, Weller made a silent promise. They would not just survive, they would thrive, and they would ensure that the Zarkthians would never dare to underestimate them again. The future was bright, and humanity's story was only just beginning.